This is RPH 140, World Philosophies, revised to be Practical Wisdom in Our Time. And this is class number 8. So this class we are going to go over very closely and carefully Aristotle's virtues. I have referred to them often, and we talked about Athens and how they lost their democracy. We've talked about a lot of dysfunction, and we also talked about the incredible responsibility the next generation has to try and create a global sustainable civilization. And it's important that we have the word civilization because we are not going to be able to use STEM alone to create a sustainable future because people have to buy into it. And it also has to be connected to virtue, the education of virtue, starting with childhood, and it has to include practical wisdom, not just intellectual virtues. It has to have the moral virtues, or it will not work. It becomes more and more evident that our STEM geniuses, like Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, are not at all interested in civilization or understanding the role of how they were raised, their relationships to their fathers or families, their relationships to fellow citizens, their relationship to the earth. These are not included in their hubris, their prideful attitude that you should cut taxes and innovation in STEM will save the world. This is just false folly, and people won't buy into it after a while. And by that time, we will have even more serious problems. So I'm going to start by going back to the beginning of the class, showing how these lectures fit together. So we started out with the evidence liberal arts needs, that my students, first and second generation, should be leaders, and that liberal arts colleges teach the kind of combination of moral virtue and intellectual virtue that Aristotle was aware the privileged class had to have, or they would abuse their privilege, and a society would fall apart, fall into probably civil war, a war between the rich and the poor. The US founding fathers were very aware of this. That's why they set up these institutions. And so today we are still ignorant about it. There are plenty of very prominent people who are ignoring it, probably never even knew the model in the first place. Then the second class was about liberal arts education as questioning everything you thought before, as re-evaluating. Doesn't mean you have to reject what you grew up with, but it's no longer true because my parents said so, or my preacher said so, or I'm an American. It has to be universal, has to be based on reason and the human condition. How it is that Athens lost their democracy. How is it that we have a toxic culture? So our culture makes people mentally and physically ill. It's a feature, not a glitch. How are they going to be able to make good judgments about how to live, especially in this generation, if they are having their brains, their bodies, and their minds hacked constantly by professional advertisers? So, especially since this is a critical time, a time of great disruption, We're moving to a digital economy, technological disruption, all the disruptions that I've spoken of every day. Globalization did not work as planned. There was a Washington consensus that all you have to do is cut taxes for especially the rich, enable them to innovate, and everything would turn out just fine. And that's never been true. It's only led to the terrible degradation of the natural environment, to the exploitation of people in developing countries. The workers and the governments were not allowed to have laws that promoted the welfare and safety of their workers and the protection of the environment, or the investors, the rich capitalist investors, if they could prove they're making less money because the governments are trying to protect their people and their land, they could sue these governments, and they do sue, and they win because the judges are put in place by corporations or by people with power who favor corporations. So the decisions are always made against them. So the globalization process has led to a lot of unrest in the rest of the world, but also within the US. The income inequality just keeps growing and growing. Jeffrey Sachs points these things out, but also says, the number one problem is the elites, but the people who are not elite, really, they can become more thoughtful, and they can make their leaders accountable, and they cannot be manipulated. They just have to stop being distracted and start reading and taking very seriously what their responsibility is in this generation. And that's what I'd like my students to do. Then, because of all this corruption, distraction, democracies are divided all over the world. People are polarized, and this is liberal arts education is designed to prevent that. But I mean, if you, for example, the perspective within which I try to see everything, there's no reason for polarization. Having to lead in the next generation during this huge fourth revolution is not Democrat or Republican. It's ridiculous, right? It's way bigger than that. It's a much more bigger historical lens through which you look at it. But because of this particular moment, because of the disruption, corrupt, politically ambitious politicians can use rhetoric to manipulate the public, get themselves elected, and then use their power to help friends harm enemies and become authoritarian leaders. So we know how it gets to be that way, how it got to be that way, and we know what we can do to save our democracies. Then Strongman is another book about the analogies between the past and today. And they include, especially the book on tyranny, the book How Democracies Die, just explicitly say that the Greeks understood this, and the Greeks passed down a legacy warning us not to make these mistakes or we could lose our democracy. So we talked about that. And now I'm giving you the two things. One thing is the value of reading great books. So we're back to the another chapter on the book about liberal arts education. And what, instead of just giving an outline, I actually asked the students a series of questions, and you can tell from the questions what the chapter said. So, so here we go. I don't know what I did there, but all right. Okay. Would you say, okay, so if you are in a liberally, if you have been liberally educated, or if you would like to be, or if you're in the process right now, my students, he says that because you have to take a lot of different courses in different fields, what you learn about in college is how knowledge is created in each of these different fields. Have you thought about the difference between how knowledge about human beings is created in the sciences, like our biology, our brain chemistry, in the social sciences, how much even our brain chemistry is affected by our relationships and our socialization. So Mr. Mate said, it's because of the socialization that being mentally and physically sick is a feature, not a glitch. So that's important, okay? Social science, which is the way we talk to each other, the way we criticize or applaud each other, those are cultural phenomenon. And that's why Aristotle says culture is a second nature to us. So we do have our basic biology, but whether or not we stay healthy or sick is predominantly a function of the culture. There are some genetic diseases, but very few are simply genetic. I think it was 2%, but maybe 5%. The rest of it is a product of culture. How about knowledge in literature, right? So in literature, you think of a person's inner life. Somebody is speculating, admittedly, about other people's inner lives when they're telling a story. But you also have essays, you have memoirs, autobiographies, poems. These are people describing their inner lives. And then the final thing is, how do you figure out how to put them all together? Do you try to think about yourself in all these ways? And then with philosophy, you read about something like the virtues, and then you compare yourself. Is this the way I think? Does this affect the way I act, the way I feel? So that's what I'd like my students to think about. Take it seriously, apply it to their lives. Humanities majors are well equipped to handle complexity and ambiguity, think creatively, communicate persuasively, understand the needs of customers and employees if they're working in a business. But capacity, but there's plenty of other organizations, and it would be the same. A coach has to worry about the athletes, teacher, student, every position of authority. Do you think it's important to give up on clear and simple answers and face reality in all of its complexity? I hope so, and I hope I've communicated that to you, because especially in this disrupting times. Do you realize how different the future will be from the past? The climate will change, cultural responses to it will change, and the global culture, civilization will change. We just don't want civilization to break down entirely. And that's why I think Aristotle's virtues are a good way to maintain a global, sustainable civilization. Are you ready to adapt to the changes and lead others so we aren't afraid, trying to find someone to blame, or trying to revert to an idealized but false, innocent past? Those were the temptations that the strong man was able to capitalize on, right? Nostalgia, utopia, and crisis, right? And looking for someone to blame. Do you see yourself as inventing a new industry or working at one, or as engaged in a kind of intellectual skill that does not exist right now, right? There'll be so many new things on the horizon. Aristotle is cited as one example. Yeah, Dershowitz actually uses Aristotle when he says, liberal arts, you're being forced every day to think about the hardest things people have ever thought about. So that's the list. Um, you need to refer to those virtues and vices when you think about your lives and you make decisions. Do you make a decision by thinking about the extremes and finding a middle ground? All right. The first day of class, I asked students, how did you decide to come to Lyon College? And hopefully they would engage in that. What were your other alternatives? Why did you choose Lyon? And then, are you glad you did? What were the good things about it and the bad things about it? Using Aristotle's model is what the author means when he says liberal arts education helps you learn to reflect in the widest and deepest sense for the sake of citizenship, for the sake of living well with others above all, for the sake of building a self that's strong and creative and free. So it is about living an examined life. Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. And as we'll see with Aristotle's virtues, you have to find the middle ground. You can only do that if you're reflecting. What are the options? And why is one better? And always thinking about the common good, thinking about yourself as a citizen. All right, scientific knowledge relates to external reality, that which lies outside our minds and makes itself available for objective observation. Humanistic knowledge relates to our experience of the world, to what reality feels like. So that's one distinction. I would say that more and more, what we consider our objective outside reality of science is actually a natural world that has been polluted, corrupted, and is not the same as it used to be. We are literally changing what we observe. And that's very important because we shouldn't assume that air has to be polluted. 90% of the people in this world are breathing unhealthy air. And that's not science in the sense that you're a detached observer. You should be engaged in it and you should be measuring that pollution and figuring out what to do about it. So we are changing the biosphere, and that should not make us happy. And we should not passively accept it and just observe it. We should actively try to minimize the damage and make up for what we've done. So that's important. Figure out how can we get to an equilibrium where nature can once again exist in some kind of a meaningful cycle so it doesn't break down. If nature breaks down, culture will break down. So we're in a very precarious, important position. The reason to read great literature is to see if the authors may know you better than you know yourself. Have you ever had an experience like this, where you realize the author stole all your best ideas? Okay, I cannot figure out why it keeps doing this, but all right. Okay, have you had that experience? But these great authors stole your best ideas, expressed them a lot better than you did. You say, oh, that's me. That's the essential experience of art. We see our nature mirrored up to us, but we see it as if anew. We recognize permanent potentialities within ourselves, and it gives you models for experience. So I definitely think Aristotle's virtues can be a model. You can look at it and say, oh, that's how I think, or, oh, I didn't realize I think like that, or, gee, I've been so impulsive. This is a better way of thinking. I'm capable of this, right? I have the potentiality to live an examined life. Okay, I mean, I had these experiences when I read Plato's dialogues. It was like, it was profound. How did he know? I just, for example, my father did speak out like Socrates. He did speak out against the Vietnam War and racism, environmental destruction in his sermons. And there were people that accused him of being a communist. And I did have friends like Crido who said, you know, if you have kids, you shouldn't rock the boat because the kids are going to get demonized by friends or teachers, which did happen, but not too seriously in my case, but it happened. So, I mean, all these things and the questions that Socrates talks about, what is piety? What does it mean to be righteous? What is truth? What is virtue? What is justice? What is beauty? I asked all those questions to myself before I read Plato, and it was great. Um, I just thought Socrates also talks to himself, which I did all the time. And I know that there are stories of people who go to mental institutions and say they hear voices and they get checked in. I was like, whoa, if you hear voices, that means you belong in a mental institution? And then I read Plato and I thought, okay, I'll be a Plato scholar. It'll be a lot cheaper than going to a mental institution. And my parents would probably be happier. I hope they would be happier. Um, but I hope all of you can say this. And I've had a lot of students say that, yeah, in their groups, they talk about that and what art has taught them about themselves, what it feels like, also not just about yourself, what it feels like to be someone else. You're not at the center of the universe. Art teaches empathy and cultivates emotional intelligence. It should be able to make you a better person, but only you can make yourself a better person. No outside influence can make you better or worse. Do you think of the social sciences as oversimplified in order to get causal correlations? While the humanities is all about unintended consequences, complexity, the disasters that result when you think you know more than you know, etc. So I think you can combine social science with humanities, but you have to be careful. There's a reward for simplification because you get better results. I was on a committee, Student Creative Arts and Research, and there was a social science project, which was about whether those Jolt drinks actually change people, whether people can tell when they've had one of those Jolt, I don't know, kinds of, they aren't soda. They're, I don't know, I call it Red Bull or something. They have more caffeine and more sugar. And so they gave some, they had a control group, and then they gave some people the real thing. And then they asked them a series of questions. And then the result was pretty clear that if they had it, they were always more jittery. They always felt more jittery. And so I thought I was the chair of the committee. I thought this was incredibly trivial. And there were other um, submissions that were a lot more profound. Like, how did little towns in Arkansas deal with racism? Some of them integrated the African Americans and some of them separated them. And how did that play out over time? That was really a good paper, but I got outvoted completely. I only think 2 people out of 7 on the committee. So everything that I had as the top, everybody else in the committee had as the bottom. And I quit after that because I had to announce the stuff and I didn't want to get associated with it. That's a reason why I don't like leadership. I feel like trying to exercise power makes you powerless because you have to represent whatever people under you decide, and good grief. So that was one of my few experiences of leadership, and that's enough. So there's other social science research that's really important. When I taught at Asia University, those students were trained to do social science research, often about women and their situations. And most of that was really important, getting through to women in developing countries and making them aware of agency. Also, basically just making them aware that they're being listened to. But also, we read, in my class, we read a lot of poetry and artwork made by women, for women, about women from these developing countries. And that was also really, really, the students liked it, and I loved it because they would bring their examples. And so we have to think about that. Economics is the problem because it has so much authority and it's mechanistic. It isn't the way people are, and it's not the way you would want them to be, right? Is it a virtue to live your whole life in a way that will maximize your own economic self-interest? You would never get married. You would never have kids. You would be like Scrooge. You would never celebrate holidays because you make more money if you work every day of the year. It's just that model of rational is just horrible. It's inhumane, making yourself into a machine, an extension of the economic system. Why do people buy into it? I don't understand. It never works for things that the consumer has to buy, like education, healthcare, basic healthcare. If a government says you have a right to it, it should never be motivated by the profit motive, because the profit motive will give you the worst product at the highest price. So there definitely should be government involvement. Social democracy is the only way to have a middle class. So it doesn't explain most of my students' parents because they sacrificed to get them to college, and not for their self-interest, but for their kids. And I think not only material self-interest, that was another thing Mr. Dershowitz talks about. It's not return on investment. It's learning how to live an examined life. All right. The economics model is very damaging. It also does not factor in the effect of a business on the natural environment. It's called an externality. That is why we are destroying the environment. We have a global economic system that exploits nature, no limit, no consideration. The companies don't have to pay. That's what we said under Stiglitz, the globalization, is that we exploited their resources, we strong-armed them into not having any regulations, suing them if they tried to have regulations. So it was rational on their part. The Washington Consensus is American self-interest of a very few, very rich people. It's exactly why it was mismanaged. But they had this ideology, as Mr. Stiglitz said. Have you ever had the experience of reading history or the ideas of someone from the past and realizing that those ideas have a profound effect on the way you think, feel, and live? Okay, and I taught the Western intellectual tradition for years. And, you teach Descartes, Kant. The students, I mean, they look at it, they imagine reading it, it's going to be incredibly boring. And then they go, oh, I think like that. Or Elon Musk thinks like that. Even if they don't, they know this is influencing our culture and our life. So to what extent do you think we're historical creatures? We can't escape our collective and personal past, and to what extent that the reason to understand the past is to avoid repeating it, to adapt what is best and reject what is worst, and then move forward to create a better future for yourself, your community, your country, the world, your children, your grandchildren. Do you agree that as an adult, this is what Mr. Dershowitz says, you have to go way beyond exercising a skill you were trained to do and also see yourself as part of a system? Here at Lion, a lot of effort is made to bring all the employees into the community and to bring students in when they arrive. So the college experience is a complete immersion experience, and it's intended to give you the ability to create your life and become a better citizen, because Americans are supposed to govern themselves collectively rather than depend on a powerful leader and his political appointees, right? We're not supposed to have strong men. We're supposed to self-govern. From one novel, this is a quote from a novel that Mr. Dershowitz quotes from at the end of his chapter. It's called The Marriage Plot. It was a college student taking a final in a religious studies class, which he probably would not have taken if he didn't have to. And he was surprised that this happened. While he wrote, he felt for the first time as though he wasn't in school anymore. He wasn't answering questions to get a grade on a test. He was trying to diagnose the predicament he felt himself to be in, and not just his predicament, but that of everyone he knew. It was an odd feeling. He kept writing the names of Heidegger and Tillich. In my class, it would be Aristotle or Locke or somebody else, but he was thinking about himself and his friends. As he responded, Mitchell kept being his answers toward their practical, bringing his answers toward their practical application. He wanted to know why he was here and how to live. It was the perfect way to end your college career. Education had finally led Mitchell out into life. Really, the question is, how shall I live? Socrates says that all the time. And I know that because I used to ask myself that all the time. How am I supposed to live? And it's the question, and it never goes away. I'm still asking it. I'm still trying to come up with the best answers I can. But the model is, okay, here's the model that I always compare myself to and that I encourage my students to do in any of my classes, really. We just explore different issues. I have a class in environmental ethics, class in women's issues, a class in philosophy of art, and then a number of other classes, logic. But they all end up with, how shall I live? How can this lead me to a flourishing life? So as I go through it, I want my students or anybody watching this to consider specific examples of why you agree or disagree. So examples of what you would consider temperance, but other people would not, things like that, why you have the position you have. So the goal is happiness. This is the key. This is going to come up again and again. Activities of soul in accordance with virtue in a complete life. So what is the human condition? We are a creature whose destiny is to understand patterns in the universe, in human affairs, the nature of the human psyche, and to spend your life trying to develop and exercise your humanity. We were born with the potential to develop these virtues because of the human condition. We began life acting one way or another. This eventually develops into a habit, but it requires continual self-examination and examination of others. Each virtue is connected with some aspect of human life experienced in some way by everyone. We're not necessarily conscious of this. It gets conditioned differently, but it has the same origin, same response to the situation of an intelligent creature. So each virtue is behavior that avoids two extremes, too much or too little. Cultures disagree on what is too much or too little, but every culture has limits. For example, anger. Anger is part of our life. everybody gets in situations that involve anger, and some cultures allow you to express it a lot more than others. And it's still there, though. And there are better and worse ways to do it, even if cultures are different. There's 4 levels of character strength in relation to some or all of the virtues. So a wise person, actually in relation to all of the virtues, they desire to do what's best. They know what's best. They take pleasure in doing what's best for its own sake with no ulterior motive. They're just happy that they actually have good judgment. In many types of situations that they've developed a reputation for it, that they're looked up for it, but they're always working on it, and they're always admitting they don't know, and they're always self-educating, thinking about how they could do it better. A morally strong person doesn't desire to do what's right, but they know what's best. They repress their emotions and they do it. A morally weak person doesn't desire to do what's best. They know what's best, but the emotions win and they don't do it, and they have regrets, but they can change. A self-indulgent person does not even know what's best. They don't think that excess pleasures are unhealthy or irrational. They have no regrets. They have a hardened character. They're very impulsive. They overreact in relation to every virtue, and they never change, and they get more hardened over time. Okay, so what are the virtues? They're personal, social, political, and intellectual. All right, so the 2 basic ones are related to our instinctual drives, pleasure or fear. So temperance is self-control in relation to the pleasures we share with the animals, eating, drinking, and sex. So extensive social networks are developed in every society to provide for these needs. Today, we have a global food network that is corrupt, like for profit. We get people addicted to sugar, and sugar is not healthy. And then we don't have a long-term plan for drinkable water. So our excesses are going to come back to bite us. Sexuality, there is a lot of variability, but children are just very dependent for a long time. And so in the past, extended families was the way to get them raised. And now we have more and more of these nuclear families, and the families are falling apart. So it is important in a society where families are mobile, that the society rewards or um, sort of acculturates people to link sexuality to long-term committed relationships. And I think you don't have to be heterosexual to have a long-term committed relationship. You can raise children. And this is based on evidence. And I think politicians use the traditional family as a way to get votes. But again, I'm willing to step back on that to avoid polarization. But on the other side, I do think people should make commitments to long-term sexual relationships. I don't think you should have, serial sexual relationships in principle, that they would be better. Going through the ups and downs with another person is really a way to strengthen your character, to know yourself, to build your character, and to create a really meaningful history. I think a lot of my students really want that. But there's a lot of people who are not capable of that level of intimacy. So they can't blame themselves if they make every effort possible, and they realize the person that they're married to or living with has no interest. And so that is a problem, because children do need stability, and they don't have extended families so much. And so it's a problem in our society. Another problem is the incredibly long period of time before young people get enough education, before they can get a job that would be middle class. And so they're asked not to get married, or so that's why birth control has made a big difference, is that they can actually have sex and be sexual beings before they are in the end of their 20s, which is just unheard of compared to other societies. People got married at age 15 or something. So the reason, the reason sexuality is so controversial is partly political, but it's partly because of these realities related to the kind of economies that we have, kind of education, the kind of social mobility, the the fact that women are just as good at men as the kinds of jobs in a digital economy, the fact that gay people are just as good as straight people, right? And so that would be a motive not to discriminate in hiring, in housing, and people are perfectly capable. All right, so then courage is the other one. It's aggression, sex and aggression, and it arises, we share with the animals, because animals feel fear, and animals react with aggression if they feel like they're being threatened. So we have, because we are creatures of culture, we have some fears are just like the animals' fears, but just if you're immediately attacked, violence, you can react. But most of the fears driving human beings, are fear of pain, fear of illness, fear of death, early death in war. And the Greeks emphasized that it's not as big a deal anymore because we have so many cyber wars. The next wave of military, I would assume, is going to be much more cyber, much more tech oriented. Um, so in the past, it's making sure you face danger for the right reason in the right way. A citizen soldier is somebody who obeys orders and does not think about the context or the motive. Um, they, they could be motivated by personal honor, the desire to be honored so that they can become promoted to a political leader. And there are people who are high-spirited and they overreact because they're confident because they're ignorant of the dangers. That's not real courage. The professional soldier is only confident when they know they'll win. If they're losing, they'll run away. There are class divisions within the military. And then there's non-military. People are making money on weapons, and they lobby political leaders to keep making weapons, and then they'll encourage politicians to go to war because that's how they profit. They convince themselves that wars are so important, but the profit motive really distorts their judgment. The best courage in this case is to face the danger for the right reason in the right way at the right time. But then when you're outside of the war situation, you can step back and think about, is this a just war? Was that particular raid that I was asked to participate in, was that appropriate or was that a massacre? So in a free society, I wrote a book about trying to maintain a strong military in a free and open society. And when you're in the military, you have to do what you're told, especially in battle. But in a free society, when you get back, you should speak out. You should talk about whether these wars are just or unjust. You should demonstrate. You should make the public aware, which they often aren't. Now that we have a professional military, people just don't think about it that much. And leaders can get away with getting rich on war, which happened in the second Iraq War especially. But yeah, we have to be diligent about these things. The fear of death is, again, people are making a whole lot of money at the moment, helping developing these pills and therapies where people who are aging, their bodies are trying to die, and they keep extending it and extending it, costs a lot of money, and the bills are sent to their grandchildren or great-grandchildren, right? And there's no money for education for those children because we're keeping old people alive. Fear of pain is, again, is it caused by legitimate health problem or just by bad habits? So you could have bad habits, obesity, lack of exercise, whatever, and then if you experience pain, back pain because or knee surgery, whatever, and you don't want any pain, so you buy pain pills or you get surgery. Again, there's plenty of people making money off of it, and they'll feel sorry for you and think they're saving the day. But it's corrupted by greed. Fear of failure in the economic system. And this is important as the economic system changes so radically. We need to adapt. You need to constantly make decisions about how much to challenge the laws or the norms or act in ways you don't think is ethical in order to keep your job. There are, in a lot of companies, the younger people, the recent hires, get asked to fly out and be gone half of the time in these consulting businesses. There are a lot of businesses that are like that. And so the older people can stay home with their families. There's that, you're just sort of using the younger folks, but also asking them to challenge, to push the envelope, because, of course, the more established people don't want to do that or get caught. All right, so again, this will be very fluid as we move toward a different economy. What about fear of loss of status? This would be the social media issue, where you lose status or whatever it is. You lose friends, you gain friends, or whatever, and you develop your own brand. It's just ridiculous. You become your image. This is an unexamined life, right? You become your own celebrity. It's really unhealthy because you can't really live your life, or you can't. What happens when you suffer? Can you work through that? How do you think through the obstacles and the ups and downs of life? And you're staring at your brand on Facebook. Are you going to be honest? Or what? Or you try to imitate other people, give you the impression they don't have any problems. It is really a tremendously corrupting influence. Mostly because it's not acknowledged, and the level of the corruption in terms of your self-conscious awareness is truly undermining our ability to act wisely in this model of wisdom. Fear of social ostracism, being silenced, not asked to attend events, losing your job. There's lots of stuff, and that's all socially constructed. That's so the people in power create a model of what's normal and acceptable, and then everybody else has to conform or suffer. And that's not, animals have things to be afraid of, and they have some kind of social hierarchy sometimes, but the level of it in the US in human beings is just way, way beyond that. People fear going to hell. They're taught these schemes about heaven and hell. An animal, mother doesn't teach her children about heaven and hell, right? They don't have that kind of language. They can communicate a lot of things, but they can't develop in their imaginations images of heaven or hell or anything like that. Human beings are unique, and that can make them uniquely bad or uniquely good. Either way, it doesn't make us better. It just makes us more complicated. Generosity is very important. And I have emphasized that in the past because we all really do depend on each other, and giving away money and time is just a recognition of that fact. And you're relating to people in a way that develops trust between fellow citizens and goodwill. You're showing people that you have goodwill for them. Magnanimity is how the rich give money away. And this is a big issue since Citizens United in 2010, when billions of dollars can now be spent on political campaigns. Whereas before, rich people were taxed more. So in the 1950s, the maximum tax bracket was 91%. So that meant if you didn't want to get taxed when you die, you start giving your money away. The philanthropy was big, it was expected, the obligation of the nobility. Then under Nixon, it was 75%. Under Reagan, it was 50%. Under George W. Bush, it went to 35%. Under Donald Trump, I think it went to 17%. And I think it's going down again. So the tax system is getting more and more out of whack, where the rich, every time there's a tax, a cut of cutting taxes, the rich get way, way more cut than everybody else. And middle-class people would be a lot better off if the rich were taxed and the schools were better and affordable housing existed and public transportation. All these things would benefit everybody in the bottom 2/3 or 3/4 a lot more than getting $100 or something more a month to buy on consumer goods, because it's really in their interest to have programs for educational programs, all these things that enables them to have a middle-class life. They depend on so much: education, housing, healthcare, and taxing the rich to provide that for everyone else. But we are not doing that. We've been cutting taxes for a long time. Bill Gates started his investment company as well as his foundation. He's aiming for a carbon-free future in his investments, and he aims for his philanthropy, among other things, worked on vaccines for kids around the world. Charles Koch is a fossil fuel billionaire, and he wants to preserve our economy. And so he says he focuses on innovation, but it's only fossil fuel innovation. He says he wants to end monopolies, but he got rich from a tax loophole and he had a monopoly. And he is cutting out, he's in charge of the campaigns now. And when Mr. Trump won, one of the goals of Project 2025 is to eliminate environmental laws. And the claim is that, oh, we can innovate better if we don't have those laws. Well, Charles Koch is not interested in that. We could have a carbon tax. There's a lot of things we could do to go green, and we could have incentives and disincentives, but we're not doing it right now, and the Chinese are doing it. So for right now, that's the way it is. But I tell my students, this is not going to last. The climate will change. In 4 years, I think the next presidential election, they hardly mentioned it at all in the debates, which I was shocked. Which again is why I want to say environmental stuff is not political. It's been politicized, but nature doesn't care. we can adapt and we can try to create a sustainable society or not, but it's going to degenerate according to the scientists who do climate modeling. It is falling apart, and no politician can redefine that. So nations will be moving ahead or moving behind on a response to that, and then an economic windfall from going green. But these other issues, lots of other issues, more controversial, but not that one. Then there's private sector organizations, non-government organizations, so that or the nonprofit, right? Or philanthropy. There's a lot of different kinds of organizations helping to distribute wealth, sometimes through the wealthy people create foundations. The goal should always be a large and stable middle class within a nation, has to include a large inheritance tax. So an entrenched wealthy class will not form. Aristotle was very concerned about oligarchy. That's the worst kind of destruction of a flourishing society, is when the rich walk away with everything. And that happened in the Greek city-states. They were constantly having these civil wars between the rich and the poor. And so that's why Solon created a constitution that tried to weave together the rich and the poor. He had amnesty. He forgave debts from the past so that people could get a fresh start and they wouldn't start getting indebted to the rich to the point where it was hopeless, could never catch up. Same thing happened in the Roman Empire under Tiberius. I'm sure it happened many times. Those are the examples that I know of right off the top of my head. Even temperedness is the mean in relation to situations involving anger. Don't overreact. One form of overreacting is revenge. You hurt everyone, and it leads to the other side retaliating, right? So there's many Greek tragedies and stories, Homer, people overreacting, and then there's a counter reaction. It just does so much damage. Then other people are at the other extreme. They don't get angry when they should, and they end up holding a grudge. So there is a culturally induced depression, Mr. Mate would say. The way we get socialized can cause or trigger a genetic tendency toward depression. And one way you do that is if you hold a grudge, if you don't just speak your mind, if you're angry. Many character traits are epigenetic. The person might have a genetic tendency, but the culture doesn't trigger it, won't activate. We can create a culture that triggers the genetic capacity for depression. And that would be one where people aren't allowed to react. Rational ambition, which is you figure out what it is you really like to do, and you have a skill at it, and you think it's your best way to contribute to the well-being of the society. So you develop, okay, so you figure that out, then you go to school and get the license you need to do that kind of work. And the big question now is what kinds of jobs will the next generation have? STEM jobs, but also service jobs, teaching and healthcare. COVID has taught us that, especially young kids, they can't learn online. They've got to be in school. So teachers are teachers. Teachers are important. And then because of the aging population and our capacity to keep people alive, healthcare will be a big one. What sort of skills are necessary? Technical and social emotional. So the education should be in humanities disciplines so that people develop social emotional skills, social science, and the sciences. You are ambitious to succeed within an organization. You recognize your abilities and the best place for you to be on the hierarchy. It's not just the job that makes the most money or has the most power, but the one that you really feel like you can do well. You learn on the job to improve the organization and to be promoted. They shouldn't split apart, right? You make the organization better. If you work in a good organization, they will recognize that and you'll be given other tasks to do. Constantly learning, you lead other people by examples, you mentor other people beneath you and develop friendship bonds with people. Rational pride is you know how to honor citizens that make the most meaningful contributions to social well-being using their talents. So every organization, I think, has an honor day, and it honors people who go the second mile to have a higher quality of community life. They go beyond what their job description is because organizations are communities, they're not machines. The economic model is just a lie. Current economic model of an organization as a machine. They're communities. People are bound together by friendships, mutual trust, and goodwill. So you don't distribute public honor in exchange for your own promotion, right? So people who are really contributing don't want to be recognized. They just want to make sure other people who are contributing are recognized because people disagree and jealousy occurs. So it's best if you really care about the social well-being, to make sure the right people are honored and not worry about yourself. Rational humor, you take serious things seriously, but you take yourself lightly. You learn how to laugh at all the ways our natural vulnerability and limitations lead to absurd situations. We don't get too frustrated. We don't get cynical. We keep trying. But the extremes are when people are vulgar and they just feed our worst prejudices or mean-spiritedness, and they just say it as a comedy and not in a way that tries to make you recognize it and get it out of your system, realize this is toxic, but in a way that actually reinforces it. It's cute, it's funny. No, it's not. Or if you don't have a sense of humor, you get boring and you're dull. I mean, a flourishing life should be somebody who's really good company. They have a high character. They're fun to be around because they will know how to crack a joke when you need one. Rational friendships, these are social bonds. In a flourishing life, you should have a lot of bonds with a lot of different kind of people, but you're always kind, right? Always respect their humanity, even if it's somebody who's stocking groceries on the shelf or the cashier. That's utility, but always be respectful. There's people that some people just like to go out and party with. They don't really have any respect for them. But the real friendships that make a culture great are bonding with someone else based on the desire to exercise a virtue, right? There are people you might want to volunteer with. There are people who you want to play music with. There are people who you want to go volunteer for manning the polling places during a vote, during an election. And there are a lot of people who do that. And now they're in the newspaper because there's big issues around voting and the citizens that volunteer to manage the election process. Sociability is you put up with minor injustices for the sake of overall social well-being. You avoid being mean-spirited or petty, avoid false rumors and gossip. You really want to care about social life. It's really important. And you have to know you depend on it. We all depend on each other all the time to survive, but especially to thrive, to have the good life. High-mindedness, keep life in perspective. Know what to take seriously and stay focused. Truthfulness, that you know yourself. You do not underestimate or overestimate your talents, your knowledge, your power. And it's a continual process of self-examination and examining others. You hold yourself and friends accountable to high standards of excellence and virtue. And it is harmful if people underestimate their capacities. They should speak up when they have something to say, and they should apply for a promotion if they really deserve it. Don't let yourself get denigrated or beaten down. Don't underachieve or overachieve. What are the social virtues? They virtues begin within the agent, especially those two basic ones, pleasure and fear, and that are only exercised in the context of a relationship, right? The social ones. Most relationships are between equals, unequal. People are unequal. Parent-child relationship based on a social role, the expert and the one needing their expertise. Doctor, trainer, coach, employer, lawyer, teacher, real estate agent, everything, those are all unequal. We depend on each other. We have to trust each other. We have to trust that these authorities know what they're doing. Okay, and then there's relationships on being citizens living in a nation under the laws. That should be equality. So you have to deliberate based on emotional empathy and intellectual capacity to think of the principles of the golden rule. The basic principle is the golden rule combined with a heart that has empathy. And there's three types of groups: family, your extended family, that's to enable babies to survive. The village is people come together for economic exchange and to survive more efficiently. And that can be material well-being. It also means protection, security from outside threats. Political association. People, this is the highest level for the sake of the good life. People choose to create a level of community based on flourishing. Life is more than just material exchange or protection from threats. Life is about exercising all of these natural capacities we have. We're intended to use them. You might think if there's a God, that God created us to use them. You might think it's a product of evolution because of our connections to the outside world, because we've understood. We engage in science and artistic activity and all these other things that we have been able to flourish. So you can call it whatever you want to call it. It's either secular humanism, but it's spiritual humanism. It's definitely ancient humanism because it's a correspondence theory of the truth. It comes as a result of interacting with the outside world, the natural world, and also with the social world. All right, people choose to create a level based on flourishing and not being driven. They reject money, fame, power. So these capacities are scientific inquiry. Free scientific inquiry, I mean, it's not motivated by money or power. It's just finding out about the world for its own sake. Free artistic expression, not tainted by money or fame or power. Free speech, where you really are authentically, right? You have to have virtue to engage in speech that really is helpful. But people can choose to use their speech to destroy their democracies, and that's what the Athenians did. And Aristotle thinks rhetoric is really serious. Also, he has a whole book on rhetoric. Freedom of association is really important. In order to have these things, citizen engagement in human life, There has to be a strong and stable middle class. People have to have enough time and energy to participate in public life, to get informed about the life of the polis and the decisions being made. And then in Athens, especially, people were on the assembly and they were chosen by lot and they were on the juries. So ideally, the citizens would take turns ruling and being ruled. All right, so what are the political virtues? The pleasure that comes from making a profit. Those need to be governed by a standing body of laws. The economic sector. So you make laws that go beyond the village where profit's the only motive. And you make laws that create a middle class and a high quality of life. So, okay. There are laws that would, like the law that says you can't interfere with the economic sector, and if you try, you get arrested or pay a fine. But those aren't political. Those aren't creating a polis. To have a polis, you have to have laws that do intervene in the economic sector. For example, to have a high inheritance tax so that you can have a middle class. The art of legislation is making laws that citizens have to follow, but also it's anytime you're engaged in this art, when you make rules for an organization or you have any kind of group that comes together for the sake of developing some natural capacity or exercising a virtue. So on college campuses, they talk about Greek life. Well, that was the idea that students would come together and they'd have their own organizations, make their own laws, enforce their own laws. So it's like a mini democracy. They're practicing for becoming voting adult citizens who participate in the broader political life. The best laws include enabling or requiring citizens to participate in public life by voting, being juries, volunteering to help people vote. The best societies, the citizens take turns ruling and being ruled. Anyone can run for office. Elections depend on competence and your record. Society is structured so citizens are informed about the candidate's experience and how that relates to the skills necessary to do this particular government job. That's what a strong man undermines all of this, but it is common sense. So in this case, I'm just giving you this flow of what you should be looking for. And if you want to, you can go back and think about, well, what about the strong man? How does he measure up? And then Ruth, the author of the book, would say, well, yeah, he pretty much violates them all. And that it is interesting, right? So I can tell you the stories of the strong men or how democracies die. And now you can look at Aristotle, you can get that model in your head, and then you can understand why it can be used to critique any kind of political leader. International law is also playing a larger and larger part. It should, because of climate change. Many of our problems now are international. And so we should agree to a standing body of laws. Federal laws and enforcement agencies within our country, environmental protection, education, energy. We have state laws, we have local ordinances. So the laws also concern the distribution of wealth. Those who rule, if they're ruling well, they know how to allocate resources to develop human capabilities to the highest degree. Talents are recognized, opportunities are created to develop the talents, and people are unequal in their talents and needs, but they should all be given what they need to create the highest level of social evolution. So if someone from a poorer background should be given the opportunity for education, if they do well, they should be given the opportunity to govern, to have a leadership post. If they do well, right? It just should all be based on your what you actually do. But there's ways that you can avoid wasting money. Nobody would want to have given government money for me to get a PhD in math. That would be a total waste of money. So, of course, you have to prove you have the natural capacity and the motivation for the government then to provide the opportunity. If you don't have the opportunity because of the conditions you were born into, which is not due to your lack of effort. Government services, providing citizens with what they need to flourish, education, healthcare. When the customer, students or patients have to buy the product, this is a big mistake. The profit motive should not control these things because the profit motive will corrupt education. If a state has to buy an educational system from a private company, the company will exploit that horribly. This is happening, I know, in my state. The governor agreed to buy from a certain company a certain kind of educational system, and it had been proven already not to work, not to be worth the money. But it's the governor's friends or whatever. It makes her look good because that's what the voters want. They shouldn't want that. And we've gotten a corruption of what we're looking for. Government tax breaks for green energy, scientific research that promotes human well-being, not motivated by profit, right? So the companies have to, in order to apply for government money, they have to show that they have a good product, that it will be used for the benefit of the people. And the Inflation Reduction Act does have a lot of government funding for green products and for going green. I think Mr. Trump might be trying to cut that, but I'm not sure where he's at. He's just starting out. And this is at this time, right? Green energy is the thing because of our fourth industrial revolution. There's other private sector non-government organizations also should be organized to promote human capabilities. In China, the government gives loans to businesses and tells them they should innovate on green energy products. And then when they succeed, they sell these products around the world. They pay the Chinese government back. And we don't do that. Jake Sullivan, who was one of Biden's people, main advisors, he thought that was a good idea. We should do more of that. But I don't think that's going to happen. I'm just not sure what's going to happen at the moment. I don't know if Elon Musk is going to want to innovate in green energy. I can't figure it out. So we will find out. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the New Development Bank, these are loans given to nation states. But as I pointed out, Mr. Stieglitz pointed out, that was mismanaged. Few Americans got rich. The goal should be a global middle class, high inheritance tax within nations, so a small rich elite doesn't gain control. And that's happening, of course, all over the world. The small elite is getting more and more centralized wealth and power, which is pretty scary, but we shall see what happens. How about punishing someone who breaks the rules? So you make a judgment about how to punish them, how the victim should be satisfied that the punishment is adequate to the crime, but also that the punishment is oriented toward rehabilitation and getting them back in the society and having a flourishing life. Everyone should be treated equally. And of course, that doesn't happen in our country because if you're rich, You can hire an expensive lawyer. The reason why the lawyer is expensive is they're successful at getting people off the hook if they've been committed, or persuading people in any sort of way. You need to in any sort of court case. Whereas the poor, because they have a right to a lawyer, a state will assign them one, but it's the state of Texas had assigned people lawyers that had been disbarred, lawyers that fell asleep during a trial. It just wasn't anywhere near equality of representation, legal representation. And that should be a problem. The Scandinavian nations have reputation for trying to rehabilitate their people who break the law, whereas the USA is very punitive and doesn't provide for jobs or different housing, anything after they get out. So the average person who's been in jail or prison, and this might be an old statistic, but they return 6 times before they finally get out and stay out, which is ridiculous. It's very expensive. And the Scandinavian countries, much less repeat offending problems. You just invest in people from the beginning. International laws, money laundering is a huge problem. And a previous lecture talked about that. Federal laws, the federal agencies that enforce the laws, the FBI, CIA, EPA, Department of Justice, Housing and Human Development. There's many, many. And they're all trying to security, protect us from outside threats, as well as protect us from environmental protection, protect us from pollution and toxic waste, and then also figure out how to punish people who commit federal crimes and create a middle class, education, healthcare, human services. So there are needs for all these agencies. Then in each case, knowing how to apply the laws to a particular case. This is what judges or juries do. And in other organizations, there are panels or arbiters of the issues that come up within those organizations. Practical wisdom. A person who has a reputation for practical wisdom can do what's best in particular situations. They have a reputation for this over and over. So the object of wish is the ultimate goal is to cultivate flourishing, happiness for everyone involved to the highest level possible. They know how to deliberate well about possible choices in a given situation. They can set out all the options that are actually possible. So this is, you avoid nostalgia, you avoid utopia. Everybody wants world peace. Who doesn't want world peace? But my choice might be, should I make this video tonight, or should I read a book about world peace, or should I go down to Arkansas and stand in front of the Capitol building saying, with a sign that says world peace, you know. I mean, there's a long, long way from what we wish to actually how are we going to live our lives right now in a way that, as far as I know, is the best way for me to contribute to human flourishing, which is why I'm making the video. It's the best I can think of, which is really, I'm ignorant of a lot of things. I know I'm missing things, but for the moment, this is what I'm doing. All right, you can set out all the options that are possible. You can choose the one that's best. You can explain to people why it is best. You can teach people. And then you can persuade people. You can convince people to do it so that it'll work. You might have a view of which option is actually best, but if people don't agree to do it, if you can't persuade them, it isn't the best thing to do. That's again why rhetoric is so damaging, is that people don't know what a good argument is for a choice. They disagree on the choice, but if they don't, someone could say, well, that's a bad choice, and then give a reason. But if they can't even agree on what a good reason would be for why it's a good or bad choice, then their judgments have been corrupted, and it's really hard to figure out how to get along, but it's always better than refusing to have a conversation. So you should always talk. Having the power of understanding is somebody that doesn't actually exercise power, but they're very good at understanding the meaning of political events, the patterns, why those in power should do or are doing the wrong thing or the right thing, for the sake of learning and educating others and teaching the lessons of history. So, so this is good. And there are plenty of pundits that want to tell us how to interpret events. And I must say, that as I talked about with those people from the Brookings Institute and Harvard and all those fancy places, Yale, is that they really didn't understand the situation and they were blindsided. And okay, now that they've acknowledged that, gee, this could happen to us, then they can give us patterns and things that are very helpful. But I sure wish they had understood this could happen and gone out into the public and engaged in conversations before it got this far along. Judgment, if you have the power of judgment, you have the capacity to forgive so that a cycle of vengeance doesn't keep repeating itself. This, I think, is important because when I read it, it made me think of Christianity, right? It made me think of Jesus. You forgive 7 times, 70 times. And that's why in the West, we put together Christianity and Aristotle, the Greeks, because you can't run a society forgiving 7 times, 70 times. That puts your heart in the right place. That's empathy. But you have to make a judgment call that actually is appropriate. But because of the complexity of life and to avoid a cycle of vengeance, it is important to have the capacity to forgive. And the expression there is justice tempered with mercy. So you do have to make judgment calls all the time about that. Other capacities, the art of production. This is techne, is the Greek word. It means birth. The ability of human beings to create artifacts. So the cities that we create are, on the one hand, superimposed on nature, but on the other hand, they are our nature. They are part of us living out our natural cycle. So squirrels need oak trees to sleep in. Human beings need to build houses. Now, early on, they might have lived in caves, but gradually, as the culture gets more complex and we have more and more technique, we make products, we create more and more complex societies. But at any point in time, you can have this skill to create a good product, but you can corrupt it. If you get greedy, if you care more about money, power, popularity, you can abuse that skill and it can do harm for individuals, but for the polis as a whole. So, for example, a health food cook versus a candy maker, obviously, but it isn't just that they're abusing their capacity to cook healthy food, but it's causing healthcare problems and all that other stuff. So there's people who actually have the skill to know how to prevent people from getting sick, physically and mentally, but they usually don't make as much money. They're the people who are making money in our society right now create products, services, you name it, that aggravate, that make people less physically healthy and mentally stable. just somebody who makes shoes, right? You can make shoes that are good for your feet and function well and have an arch that allows you to maintain your arches over a lifetime. Or you can make high-heeled, pointed-toed shoes, and women have to have foot surgery in middle age because their toes are all convoluted, and it ruins their feet. They tend to cost more money. A society that admires, those kind of shoes, that sees them as a kind of status symbol, is appealing to that need for social status, that fear of losing status and ruining people's feet, which is, classic case. You could go through just about any product and evaluate it according to, do you get status for making it? Do you get status for buying it? Is it a corruption? Are you motivated by greed? Does it actually destroy, undermine the original need that you had for the product? Okay, or the service. They're also services. I would say exercise science, if you're going to be a personal trainer, are you going to teach your clients how to educate themselves, take care of their own health? Even if you lose clients over time, they become more self-sufficient, self-reliant. Well, you have to decide. I would gather that probably if you do a good job and teach them overall health, that they will recommend you, but they probably would recommend you if you didn't, because they wouldn't know the difference. But if you present yourself as different, I mean, I have to tell my students that I think you should go for it. Tell them about overall toxic culture that we're in. Tell them if you want to stay healthy, you've got to think of it much broader way. Physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, social, political, intellectual, all of these virtues really need to be working together. Here's the intellectual virtues. Calculation, the ability to calculate the most efficient way to achieve your goals. Those virtues, all the intellectual virtues can be connected to any emotions or kinds of character. The most wicked people are always the smartest because they can calculate. They have the knowledge to know what is in their interest. They also are good at rhetoric, usually. This virtue is also active when someone has created a product and needs to sell it. Are they calculating? Are they calculating how to make it accessible so people can flourish? Or are they calculating how to make the most money? If you have good character, the arguments you will formulate. So logic is another intellectual virtue. Will promote human well-being. If you're wicked, they will promote personal wealth, fame, or fortune. So when I taught logic, I taught it as a personal virtue, part of a flourishing life. And you need to use good logic, and you also need to spot rhetoric and call it out in order to maintain a democracy and a flourishing society. The capacity to persuade, this is really important. Smart people can figure out how to manipulate emotions, formulate arguments that will convince people to act in whatever ways they want them to. Okay, but even the best people have to have that capacity to persuade, or they won't. Or, the societies will flounder. The other intellectual virtues, math, it separates you from reality. It's related, learning pattern recognition is good, but then you need to take that capacity and apply it to human affairs. The sciences are important, and the knowledge of first principles, that's just the main idea, that there's an underlying order and that the universe keeps expanding and being is good, and it goes to higher and higher levels of being. And the natural world did that too, until we're starting to destroy, right, species. So that's what we ought to do as a member of a species, is to constantly seek out higher and higher levels of flourishing. It's less precise. It's really hard to know these things, and it's important not to be defensive, not to think you know, and being able to change. Okay, so the art of statecraft, putting it all together. The goal is to weave people together to have trust and goodwill, to create a strong and stable middle class. Everyone wants to live moderately, to promote their own and others' highest level of virtue, to exercise all our natural capacities. There's 6 types of government: rule of one, rule of a few, and rule of the majority, the rule of law, the constitutional government. A just society is where those in power use their power for the well-being of those over whom they have it. The citizens need to have self-control, be generous, and actually be virtuous as a part of ruling for the well-being of those over whom they have it. You could have a ruler who wants to do that, but if the citizens are irrational and vicious, it's not possible. In an unjust society, those in power use their power to help friends and families, and they punish enemies and prevent them from exercising power or having access to any social benefits. So this again is the strong man, is, Aristotle's definitions just fit really well. And there's ways. A corruption of a monarchy is called a tyranny, the rule of one person. The corruption of an aristocracy is called an oligarchy, the rule of the rich. The children of those who inherit privilege are usually no good at ruling, but they have wealth and they're given power anyway. This is happening in our country, and it's not called out, that Rupert Murdoch's children are inheriting his empire, but the oldest son is trying. Murdoch wrote his will in a way that all 4 children would get equal share. Now the oldest one wants to have it all. So he said he doesn't think climate change is an issue. It's overblown. The other 3 really do think so, and they know how Fox News has really blocked people from acknowledging climate change and wanting to do anything about it. And so now their oldest son is saying that because he wants his dad to give him the whole thing. And the dad has tried to change the will. And the first round, he wasn't successful. That is important. Like, all this stuff is really important for how the rich class are educating their children and how those children are turning out, what sort of character traits they have. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., his Carolyn Kennedy, his cousin, the daughter of John Kennedy, has just written a letter about how incredibly corrupt he is. He got her cousins addicted to drugs, taking drugs. And I mean, all this, the idea, she knows his character. That matters. Of course, Kennedy had 8 kids, 10 kids, and then he got shot. So it's not necessarily anybody's fault, but it is what it is, and it's very important because these people have advantages and they have name recognition. Trump's children. Anyway, I could go on, but I wish the public would take note. If you really have a good leader, the way you know is how are they raising their kids? Are they raising their kids to want to use their advantage for the well-being of everybody else or not? And that is a good litmus test. Okay, so the corruption of a democracy is still the rule of the many and supposedly the rule of the law. But the people now use their freedom to figure out how to get wealth, fame, and power, and they don't care about the well-being of the society. Freedom means the freedom to live however you like. And Aristotle says this leads to instability and to the rise of a powerful leader who takes over in the name of being able to recover law and order and take the money from the rich and give it to everybody else. And he ends up using power to help friends and family and harm enemies. So that's what the authors in How Democracy Died and Tim Snyder in On Tyranny, they said that, yeah, the Greeks were worried about this. And so now you can see it in relationship to all of Aristotle's virtues and his image of a flourishing life. So I always have my students, they get this little 2-page chart, and I want them to keep it in mind, and I want them to start habitually thinking about the decisions they make. Do they step back? Do they live an examined life? Do they consider all the alternatives? Do they really aim to flourish over a lifetime? And it really grieves me to see them on their phones, because that the companies are making money grabbing their attention. And when their attention is not fixed on how am I going to live a good life, there's no way that they can actually live the most flourishing life that they're capable of, because it takes a lot of thought and self-examination and after the fact, reconsidering what was good about what I did, what was bad. It's just this constant process. And I just feel really bad for my students. I don't think they realize how much opportunity they're losing just because they're hooked. They've been hacked by people who are making money off of them. So anyway, that's the lecture for today. And I hope, that people will take this seriously and that they'll also understand that it sounds like what's some antiquated old lady philosopher talking about Aristotle. Good grief. Aristotle was a sexist. I mean, I know. There's, you can on the surface of it, if you don't dig down and actually look at the definition, and if you don't realize that what we associate with the Greeks and Aristotle is not the theory. And Aristotle himself says, in the Greek city-states, the young people who are rich never learn how to obey. The young people who are poor never learn how to govern. And it's rotten, right? He's critical of his society. He almost got killed, just like Socrates. He left town, however, because he didn't want the city to commit 2 crimes against philosophy. But if Aristotle's claim is that there is justice by nature and everybody is accountable to that standard, then any stereotypes we have about Aristotle are accountable. Either they're bad readings of it or they're legitimate readings and Aristotle was wrong, right? Aristotle wouldn't think anything is right because he said so, right? He would want to be corrected. And there are some things he did say that were wrong. The things he said about women were totally wrong. But you would assume that he stands corrected, right? He's willing to listen to reason and to adjust his point of view to fit the truth. And it is the natural truth. Women are by nature equally capable. And that's great. I'm all for it. So that's the lecture for today.